Welcome back to Jubes & Co with me, Miriam Cates, and joining me until 7 o'clock, I've got my panel, the Pollster academic and GB News presenter Matt Goodwin and Labour MP Barry Gardiner. And of course, please do get your views in at gbnews.com/your say. Now, as we just heard in the bulletins, Volodymyr Zelensky has said a peace plan to end the war with Russia is 90% agrees. This is after talks with Donald Trump in Florida yesterday. Well, just get a quick reaction from the panel on that. Matt, it does feel sometimes like we've heard it all before, or we've been marched up the hills, to be marched back down again, or could there be a real prospect of peace?
Well, I hope there is, because we can't have 2026 looking like 2025 and 2024. A lot of people are dying. A lot of people are being injured. We have to get this peace deal over the line. What's that going to look like? And how are we going to do it so that Ukrainians don't feel as though they are losing dignity in the process?
Absolutely. And Barry, we're hearing that it's 90% agreed, but the remaining 10% are very tricky sticking points about territory and about American peace guarantees.
Yeah, Miriam, it's always the last 10%, isn't it? It's the Donbass. That is absolutely critical. I understand that Putin is demanding territory that his troops are not currently occupying, indeed that are being occupied by Ukrainian troops. And look, it was perhaps inevitable that there would be some sort of land swap here, but I think Europe has to be very, very cautious about this. And the security guarantees that we understand are going to be further negotiated between the coalition of the willing, as it's called, in January in Paris, is going to be absolutely vital, because there was a treaty before Russia invaded Ukraine. That treaty guaranteed the sovereign state of Ukraine, and it was violated.
Yep, the 1994 Budapest Memorandum. I can't even say that word. When we promised to protect Ukraine on condition of them giving up their nuclear weapons. Well, it didn't quite happen like that. Well, let's move on to our top story today. And it's a story you really couldn't make up, because last weekend, the Egyptian activist Alaa Abd El Fattah arrived in the UK, having been released from a Cairo jail where he'd been imprisoned for anti-government political activism. Well, El Fattah was welcomed by his family, but also by the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, who said this: "I'm delighted that Alaa Abd El Fattah is back in the UK and has been reunited with his loved ones, who must be feeling profound relief. Alaa's case has been a top priority for my government since we came to office. I'm grateful to President Sisi for his decision to grant the pardon." However, it has since emerged that El Fattah has a record of making violent and anti-Semitic statements on social media, such as calling for the killing of police. Now, questions began to be asked about how El Fattah was able to gain British citizenship back in 2021, and it has emerged that he was able to evade good character checks after taking advantage of a legal loophole created by another criminal who made a claim against the ECHR. So it's human rights law 1, British citizens 0. Well, Sir Keir Starmer is now under pressure to strip El Fattah of his citizenship, although he has this afternoon said that he will not be doing that. So we're asking, why were politicians so keen to support the Egyptian in the first place? Barry, can you shed any light on that?
Well, look, what El Fattah said 15 years ago in those tweets was vicious, it was horrible, and it was racist. And in 2021, when your Conservative government was in post, Miriam, it was Priti Patel who was the Home Secretary, and clearly there was a failure in the proper vetting that should have gone and taken place when citizenship was granted to this man. But it is ironic that the Conservatives are now trying to blame the Labour government for respecting the citizenship rights which they gave him. But look, as far as reform's concerned, I'd think that after their recent defence of Nigel Farage and it being unreasonable to hold him to account for the historic comments that he's reported to have made.
When he was 13.
This is 16, actually. This is something that they would have been better not to comment on, because the more they say that El Fattah should be held responsible, the more it looks like they're doing special pleading on Farage.
A very tenuous comparison there. But
no, I don't think so at all, actually. But look, I mean, it's 15 years ago. The key point, I think, is this. Can we actually take this man's citizenship away? And it seems to me that my understanding is in order to do that, you have to be able to say that the citizen is a current security risk to the United Kingdom. And 15-year-old tweets, which he has since disavowed, are probably not the basis on which you're going to be able to do that. And at least he has apologised for them and disavowed them, which Mr Farage has not.
This interruption is brought to you by ExpressVPN and their New Year deal. New Year, new VPN. And a huge saving of up to 80% if you act now. You're busy planning how to get in shape, but the hackers are planning how to get into your accounts. ExpressVPN locks down your connection so you can start the year protecting your data. This offer ends on the 7th of January, so scan the QR code or click the link in the description now.
Matt, I will absolutely let you respond to those accusations about Nigel Farage, but firstly, isn't it the point that there were no vetting procedures because El Fattah used this loophole that another criminal was able to create, which meant that claiming citizenship through your maternal line means you can evade these checks in the first place?
So there are so many things about this case that are really significant. I mean, the first is this is a symbol of the Uniparty. Both Labour and the Conservatives wanted this guy into the country. But as you say, fundamentally, this is actually about the European Convention on Human Rights, the Human Rights Act, being used to allow people into our country who, to be frank, should not have citizenship. And ultimately, the deeper question underneath this case is, what does it mean to be British? Now, I believe that citizenship is not the same as belonging, and belonging requires more than a piece of paper. Now, as a country, we have to have this debate. Why are we tolerating people who clearly, based on this guy's statements, do not tolerate us? We have to have this discussion. But the other thing, briefly, Miriam, is talk about Nigel Farage, Barry. Westminster is obsessed with what Nigel Farage said 50 years ago because they don't want to talk about what Nigel Farage is saying about the country today. And what he's saying is, we are sick and tired of having people in our country who hate us, who hate white people, who hate Jews, who hate Western civilization, and the era of tolerating people who hate us is over. Margaret Thatcher said this, but nobody has ever taken action ever since Thatcher said it. And it's time now. We have to draw a line in the sand.
Well, look, I would agree with you that we don't want people who are inciting hatred in this country, OK? There is no difference between us on that point. But the legislation is in place that says if you incite racial hatred, if you incite people to violence in this country, then the law will take action against you. And that law has been put in place since Margaret Thatcher, actually, and it's been put in place by a Labour government. So I think it's absolutely right that we should not be tolerating people stirring up hatred. We should not be tolerating people inciting violence.
Barry, do you understand? Yeah. Many people out there are wondering, why was Lucy Connolly put in prison, right, for the best part of 3 years for tweeting what she tweeted? This guy has said there was no genocide against Jews by the Nazis. After all, many Jews are left. Do you understand why people are out there thinking this is a crystal clear case of a two-tier Britain? Labour seemed deeply hypocritical, totally adrift with the country, has also, by the way, said really, really disgusting things about white people. It's anti-white racism, that's what this is. Do you understand how hypocritical the left looked to the country today?
Look, let's be clear. It was not the left that gave this man citizenship. OK?
Celebrated his return.
No. That's that. Sorry, hang on, because you know that's not right. Because they celebrated his return in his rights as a British citizen being allowed to come back from Egypt.
But Barry,
they did not know at that point. The Prime Minister didn't know at that point.
How did he not know, though, Barry?
The previous tweets.
Point, because the Conservative government granted him citizenship. Now, Giles Dilnot, who was a former advisor to Boris Johnson, has said today that it was all about putting pressure on the Egyptian government. Now, you can believe that if you want, who knows. But the Labour government have actively campaigned for his transfer to Britain since they came back to office. Keir Starmer has said that he's been working on this since he came into power. Why is the government so desperate to get him here?
What I want to know is why did nobody in the security services tell the government about these historic tweets? Because in your own introduction, Miriam, you rightly said that people only knew about those tweets after he came back into the country. So the point is this: the government fights for British citizens. And the Egyptian government were doing something that was profoundly wrong to a British citizen. They'd imprisoned him on trumped-up charges, basically. And we then ensured, even though after he'd been released from prison, he was being forced to remain in Egypt, not allowed to come back to the UK, which is his country, his right, we enforced the rights which you gave him.
Hang on, why is this guy British?
He's British because the Conservatives allowed him to become a British citizen.
Can I ask you, I'm asking you a direct question. Do you think this man is British?
It's a matter of law that he is British.
Right, and that is exactly the problem.
No, it's not actually, because if we tear up the laws in order to I don't know if you remember the scene in A Man for All Seasons where Thomas More says that to Will. It's about you don't tear down the laws in order to get where you want to be.
Just briefly,
because when the devil turns on you,
that everybody out there knows this, everyone watching this show knows this. British citizenship has been so devalued to the point that anybody can become British the moment they arrive on these islands and they sign a piece of paper. What they don't have, clearly, and I'm looking at this guy's tweets as I'm talking to you, in December 2010, I'm proud of being racist against whites, April 2011. I hate white people.
Terrible.
Why is this guy actually being given citizenship? Doesn't being British mean a lot more than opening the doors to people like that?
I agree with you 100%.
So let's revoke his citizenship.
That's why I said he should never have been allowed citizenship.
So would you agree that we should revoke his citizenship?
I think the law means that he has got that citizenship, and in order to take it away from him, you have to prove that it would be a security risk to allow him to continue as a British citizen.
We're going to have to leave it.
That's the issue here.
We're going to have to leave it there, but Barry, I do think, given that the law that allowed him in is only a few years old, it's hardly Magna Carta. It's not exactly ditching our entire legal system to tear that one up, is it? The loophole.
It's not about the loophole, right?
Well, it is about the loophole because that's let him in. But anyway, we've got to move on.